Welcome to our program. Our special guest today is John O'Neill Green. Good to have you here, John.
Thank you for having me, Father.
John, you have quite a background. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you've been both in police work and legal work, but perhaps you tell us how you got from one to the other and where you are now.
I in fact, started my career. I've had two careers. My first career was in law enforcement. I was a deputy sheriff and a detective in Houston, Texas for a number of years. And I started practicing law in 1993 and became involved in very limited practice involving mostly taxation issues and monetary issues.
And from taxation issues and monetary issues, you've discovered that this is a mystery.
It is a mystery. It's more of a fraud than a mystery, I would say, Father.
And do you say that as a detective that it's a fraud? I mean, you've investigated frauds of much smaller nature?
I have, and actually that my background in law enforcement gave me great insight into this specific issue in regard to this object you just held up, which we'll get into more detail in a minute. But I originally started practicing the area of taxation, and I was helping clients with tax issues. And one of the things that became apparent to me is that the system of taxation, as people believe it exists in the United States, it was very unfair to people in terms of preserving their wealth. In our system of taxation, if you have a very good year, you maybe work extra and your wages are increased and you set aside a little money, but then the next year you have a bad year, you don't get any benefit of having created all that wealth the year before. You still have to pay a big portion of your money in taxes. And so as a result of that, I started investigating the monetary system because I wanted to try to see if there was some way to balance the monetary, the use of money with the tax system to benefit my clients. And it was a big eye-opening experience that as I traveled down that road, I came to find out that our monetary system in the United States, if not the world, is a fraud basically from top to bottom.
Well, in fact, Our Lady at Fatima spoke about the errors of Russia being spread throughout the world if her requests are not granted. And it's not just an academic question here, but I think you're concerned about the average American, Canadian, Italian, European family of being able to go into the store one day in the near future and giving, whether it's euros in Rome, for example, or giving a dollar in the States or giving a Canadian dollar, and not being able to buy food, not being able to buy, you put $5 down, you get yourself a few size of milk, a few liters of milk, whatever, and you won't be able to do that. And not just you, but every family finding the same experience. Is that what you're foreseeing with this mystery or this?
I do foresee that, but in actuality, it's occurring now. Because of inflation, prices have increased to levels that some people are not able to buy basic necessities. A 2 or 3% increase in the price of some goods would prevent some people from having the resources to purchase them. And in the U.S., publicly, the government officials have said we've had as much as 20% increase in the price of basic commodities. Milk and butter. My wife in particular judges it by the cost of butter, and you've seen a huge increase in the price of butter in the U.S. And so consequently, some people can't buy butter anymore.
But you're also telling me that in some states of the United States that they will not accept a U.S. greenback or a dollar Federal Reserve note, whatever it's exactly called. They won't accept it in their stores to buy food. They want something else.
There are businesses thank goodness that there is no law that requires any individual or business in the U.S. to accept Federal Reserve notes as payment. And there are individual businesses and people in the U.S. That now refuse to deal with them and want to use some alternate type of currency.
So now you said even the U.S. Treasury says that no one has to accept one of these as payment for legal debts?
That's correct. If you go to the United States Treasury website and you look at the definition sections and the explanation about U.S. money, they're very clear there that the Federal Reserve notes have no value for themselves. They're not backed by anything. They're not redeemable in gold and silver. And basically, they're just only exchanged because of the goodwill and belief of the parties that are exchanging them that they have some value.
So at some point, it could happen, and in fact, you're saying some people already are saying, I'm not going to take those so-called U.S. dollars this is called a U.S. dollar, although I know you would correct me and say it's not really a U.S. dollar, but in common parlance it's considered a U.S. dollar. And as such, they're saying, well, you don't have to take that as payment for your debts.
That's correct. And there's a move among the states now to have specific legal tender laws enacted within the individual states that would allow gold and silver to be used as legal tender. It's really a non-issue to a point, because legal tender, even though these Federal Reserve notes state that they're legal tender and the law says that they're legal tender, that doesn't necessarily apply within the states. Each American state gets to determine whether they're going to allow a particular form of money to be legal tender. But under the Constitution, states are limited to using gold and silver coins as legal tender.
So why don't you show them what a silver coin, a U.S. dollar, a real U.S. dollar looks like?
Yes, this is a United States Silver Eagle coin. It's 1 ounce of fine silver, and it meets the legal constitutional requirements to be a dollar. This is actually a real dollar.
So when you say a real dollar, there's some definition. Where do you find the definition of a real dollar?
And to find the actual descriptive definition, you have to look back to our currency laws that date back to 1792, the Currency Act. The term the term dollar is mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, and our Supreme Court has stated that if a term appears in the Constitution, it has to have the same meaning today as it had when it was adopted. So the term dollar appears twice in the Constitution. The term dollar has been around since the 1400s. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain actually started using the dollar with the Spanish dollar, which has gone by various names over the years. And that, in fact, is the standard that we use for our U.S. dollar. The Founding Fathers, because they knew they had to have a fixed unit of measure of money in this country, gathered a number of the Spanish dollars because they were the standard form of money. Everybody in the world that was engaging in commerce at that time would freely take Spanish dollars as their currency, their payment, because they were silver. And even so, going so far as to break them into pieces to make change.
That's where the pieces of 8 comes from. You have 8 pieces making 1 Spanish dollar.
Exactly. And so they assayed these coins, this sampling of coins they took, and they found that the average weight of these coins was 371 1/4 grains of fine silver. And from that time, the definition of dollar that appears in the U.S. Constitution was fixed at a silver coin containing at least 371 1/4 grains of fine silver. And in fact, this silver coin meets that definition today, and it's in our statutes specifically describing how much these can be sold for and maintaining the minimum weight.
Now, for most of our people, they might say, well, what difference does it make whether I pay for a thing in a dollar bill or I pay for a thing in a silver coin? And I know we were talking before we came on the program that someone's done research in for example, purchasing a house in Waco, Texas in 1957. And what did that cost in $1 notes? What did it cost in silver coin notes? And then what happened after that?
Well, let's talk a little bit, before we go right into that, let's talk a little bit about what money actually is. And for practical reason, there's really no difference in how you actually pay for something. If you give someone the paper note and they accept it and you get what it is that you were trying to buy, you've accomplished your purpose. The same for the silver coin, if you were to use that as your form of money. The problem comes
or even brown eggs.
Or exactly, eggs, brown eggs. But the problem comes in is that money really has to serve 3 purposes. It has to be a medium of exchange.
That's the first thing. If I'm going to buy a house for, say, 20,000 of these $1 notes, or whatever number of these, or so many thousand brown eggs, it's a medium. That's what a medium exchange is. That I give you this, and you give me in return what I'm looking for, and we agree that this is a fair deal.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to go to the title company to close the transaction on the house that you were buying and take a wheelbarrow full of silver coins. It wouldn't be practical. Yeah. So we use some other form of money, typically paper, or these days even electronic money. The second purpose of money is to store your wealth, to have something tangible, so that if you're laboring today, no matter what your job might be, you're providing a service, performing labor, and you're being compensated through wages for that, and you want to be able to put some of that aside for a rainy day or for next year if you're injured. If you don't...
Well, either for a rainy day or to educate your child going through college in 5 years' time, or whatever else or to take a vacation or something, or to buy food. If you're in a seasonal worker and you haven't got a job for 3 months of the year, you want to be able to buy the food in those 3 months you need the food, even though you haven't got a job.
Exactly. I think it's one of, especially as a father, it's one of my most basic duties is to make sure that I have what I need to be able to provide those things for my family that they need for their temporal good. And then the third function of money is to preserve the value of your wealth. And as we'll see in a minute, that's what suffers the most by people using this fraudulent paper money, is that they have no way to protect the value of their wealth. So if we want to look at a concrete example...
So you're talking about, say, a lifetime of a person saving. If he lives, say, 80 years and he retires at 65 or 70, he needs to have enough wealth to see him through until he and his family die. And so he's needed to preserve the wealth that he's accumulated over the years. But if in fact that wealth is being eaten away, so to speak, not because he does anything, not because he eats it, not because he drinks it, not because he gives it away, just because he had so many of these in his bank account, and then 5 years later he has the same number in his bank account, but they're worth less, so he can't buy as much with it. And that's not preserving the wealth. They're not preserving it, the full value of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's look at a real example. This is an actual real estate transaction that occurred in Texas. And in 1957, we have this house, a 1,500 square foot home in Waco, Texas. And that home sold for $13,500.
That is these dollars here.
No, that is these dollars.
These silver dollars.
That's correct.
They sold for 13,500 of these.
Correct. Now we had an equivalent paper money form of the silver dollar. We had what were called silver certificates, and so if you paid for that home with the silver certificates, you would have paid $13,500 silver certificates.
That silver certificate, unlike this one, which says Federal Reserve note on this one, the one up there said silver certificate. This $1 silver certificate is redeemable for one of these.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in fact, if you had gone to a bank at that time and given them one silver certificate, they would have given you a silver dollar in return. Now, if we were going to use something else for money, some other commodity for money, we can see the actual effect of this inflation and how money is devalued. So in this particular example, we used the brown eggs for money. So
obviously, if a person, a brown egg has real value. Obviously, you can't eat so many thousand of these at one time, but if you have a brown egg and you sold it to somebody who wanted to eat it that day, or if you had a few for yourself and your family, it's got its real value. That brown egg has real value. So how many brown eggs would this house cost back in 57?
That house would have cost 37,700 cartons of brown eggs, which just means it would have cost you $13,500 to buy 37,700 cartons of eggs, which is the same price of the house.
Okay.
Now, if we go forward in time to 1982, that same home that was sold
It's 1,500 square feet.
1,500 square feet.
In that same location, in that same city.
Exactly. There was no more lawful money available. A lot of people may have heard stories about confiscation of gold. President Roosevelt, for a time, made it illegal for people to have gold, so they gathered up the gold. And then there were no silver dollars that were legal tender. President Nixon cut the last tie of money to metals in 1971. Which is a very complicated issue, but simple explanation is there is no more gold and silver coins that we can use as money in the United States.
In 1982.
In 1982. So if we had purchased that house for paper money, for Federal Reserve notes, which by then were not silver certificates, there was no connection in 1982 between the Federal Reserve note and the silver certificate. That house cost $85,400.
So before you had a silver certificate that was known as a dollar, and you could exchange that house for 13,500 silver certificates. But in 1982, this was what people would consider the equivalent of those silver certificates. But now you had to pay, what was it, 85,000?
85,400.
400. So the value of that silver certificate or that piece of paper that was called a $1 note, went from 13,000 could buy that house, 13,500. Now you had to 6 times as much or 7 times as much. So in other words, the value of this dollar all of a sudden became, well, it's hard to make it down. It almost became 1/10 of itself or something like that.
Exactly.
It became that size. Even, I mean, to take it, it was like that in 57. Now it's like this. That's how much you can buy with it. Something like that.
Correct. Now, if we had used in 1982, we're going to buy that same house for cartons of brown eggs, people will be surprised to see, I think, that we could purchase that house for 37,700 cartons of brown eggs. So in other words,
the dollar went down, so you had to pay more money for the value of the dollar went down, but you paid $85,000 for that house, or $85,000 for those 37,700 brown eggs. It's the same. The value of the egg is still worth the same thing. The house is still worth the same thing, but the dollar has gone down in value.
Exactly. Now let's fast forward to 2005. There was an intervening event between 1982 and 2005 in that President Reagan commissioned what he called the Gold Commission, and they made a report back to the president and said that our money system was unconstitutional from top to bottom. And based on that report, within 6 months, Congress reinstituted gold and silver coins as lawful money and legal tender in the United States. And so in 2005, we again have legal tender silver dollars. And if we had purchased that same house in 2005 for silver dollars, it would have cost us $13,500.
So if instead of keeping your money in paper, you had kept it in the U.S. silver dollar, and you kept that at 13,000 of these things, 13,500 of these coins, in 1957 you would buy one house, 1,500 square feet in Waco, Texas. And in 2005, you could buy the same house for the same number of silver dollars. The same house, no change in value, no change in value of the silver dollar, no change in value of the house.
Exactly.
You had the same deal. You exchanged 13,500 of these in 57, you get one house. Same size, same location, all the rest of it. You take 13,500 of these in 2005, you buy the same house again. No inflation, no devaluation of the silver dollar, it's the same value. But what did you have to pay for that house and these things?
Well, let's look at the brown eggs first before we talk about the Federal Reserve notes. If you'd have paid for it in brown eggs, we see it's no change in value. 13,500 silver dollars would have purchased 37,700 cartons of brown eggs, which would have purchased that home. So again, there's no change in value. If we had used the Federal Reserve notes, that house would have cost 113,375 Federal Reserve note dollars.
So 113,000, from 13,500 to $100,000, the same 13,000 now, instead of being this value in 82, it's almost impossible to see. It's 1/100th its value, and even less than 1/100th its value.
It'd be tough to fold it that small.
Yeah.
So what's the effect of this? You buy the property in 1957 and you sell it in 2005. Now this is a real effect that not just Americans.
Every last man, woman, and child, not just the guy that had this house, but every man, woman, and child is affected by this.
Exactly. If we had purchased a house with brown eggs for 13,700 cartons in 1957 and 2005, there was no carton of egg gain. There will be no gain and no tax due. So a person selling this house would have not had to pay a capital gain tax on the increase in the value of the house because there was none.
Because there's no capital gain because it didn't capital gain. It's just you bought it for 37,000 brown eggs. You bought it for 13,000 silver dollars. So it's the same value, same everything. No capital gain.
Exactly. And as you said, again, you buy it for the lawful money. It's no change in the value of the property, 13,500 as opposed to 13,500 for identical coins. You can see the design of the coin changed, but the actual value
is 1 ounce of silver in one silver dollar.
Exactly. No lawful money gain, no tax due. Now, if we look at Federal Reserve notes, the legal tender at that time were the silver certificates, 13,500. And those were equal to the silver dollars. The Federal Reserve banknote is not equal to the silver dollar, and there would have been a gain of $97,875.
So according to the tax law, if you make a gain of $97,000, then the tax law says, allegedly, or if I understand it correctly, that you have to pay them 25 or 50%. What would it be in that case?
Well, in this particular case, in 2005, the actual tax due on that piece of real estate would have been $34,256.
So here you have a person who has a value of a house worth 13,500 silver pieces, and it's the same value, no change, but now because they've changed the value of this, the U.S. tax code says you have to give $34,000 of these, which is approximately 1/3. So you just have to give away 1/3 of your house that was yours. Now you're giving to the government because they claim you have a capital gain.
That's correct, and that in actuality, that whole premise and the way that transaction would be calculated absolutely violates the congressional restrictions on the way that they can tax. And people don't ever see it because all they focus on is the paper money, not the value of their property that's being taken illegally.
Yeah. And not the value of the capital gain would have to be something real. All this is an accounting, apparent gain with no real gain at all.
Exactly.
But they're going to be taxed on it, and 1/3 of that approximately is going to be taken away from them.
That's correct, Father. And what we call this is this actual purported gain. We refer to it as a quiet theft. The banks, the Federal Reserve, and with the assent of our government, is actually stealing through this quiet theft the value of your real tangible property.
So somebody who's worked all their lives and acquired this value, 1/3 of it is being stolen from them on the pretext that their property has increased in value when it really hasn't.
That's correct. And to take this back to the example you mentioned a minute ago, Father, the way that you can really visualize this is there was a time in America when people didn't trust banks and people would stuff money in their mattresses or bury it in the backyard. So if you can imagine, in 1957, if you were a working man and you were laboring to preserve your wealth for your family, and you were taking those, whether they were silver certificates or Federal Reserve notes, and burying them in your backyard, and then you retired in 2005, you wouldn't have enough money to survive. On the other hand, if you'd taken those silver dollars...
So if in 57 you'd buried 13,500 of these, you'd still have the value of 13,500 of these in the year 2005, whereas you wouldn't have, 1/10 or whatever, it's gone down, the value of this has gone down about almost 96% or something like that. And then
I think the economists would tell you that the actual Federal Reserve note is worth about 4 cents today.
4 cents of the $57.
Correct.
So, in other words, if they bury that in their backyard, they've saved 4 cents out of the dollar they put there. So they've basically been working someone as a slave of the system when they really should be their wealth they can retire with.
Exactly.
Now, but for people who haven't lived in 57 and don't have a house in this, how does this affect them today? I think you're concerned about that in the not distant future, people will go to the store and give them $1 or $5 in the United States, or give 10 euros in Rome, or give $5 in Canada, whatever it is, and they will go there and they won't be able to exchange their money for what they need. In other words, they need to feed their family, they need eggs and bacon and groceries and meat and whatever else, and they won't be able to buy it. Is that, do I have that right?
I think you do, Father, and we've already seen, as I explained before, we've already seen occurrences of that. Just small increases in the price of consumer goods based on the inflation that we've had so far has created a situation where people can't buy certain food items. It's compound that by the acceleration of the devaluation of the money. Our Federal Reserve keeps creating all this money they claim to help stimulate the economy. And in fact, what it's doing is having the opposite effect. The more money any government prints, it doesn't matter whether it's the European Union or the United States federal government or the Canadian government, the more money that they print, the less value, the less purchasing power the money that's already in existence is going to have. And that's the important issue, is how much purchasing power does the actual form of money that you have maintain?
At some point, people lose complete confidence. I mean, there's of course, in the United States history, there's the continental dollar, which wasn't worth anything after a while. It's worth a continental, as they say. Or in Germany in the 1920s, you had take a truckload or a wheelbarrow full of millions of dollars to buy millions of marks or whatever it was, whatever they called it to buy a loaf of bread. And that would change tomorrow. So if it was 1 million today, it was 2 million tomorrow, and it's 5 million the day after that. So people couldn't keep up with it. And the same thing's happened in Rwanda, but there are people predicting that's what's going to happen to the currencies of places like the United States in the non-distant future. Is that
non-distant future, that's a good way to say it, but being more specific, I think, and I'm not an economist, I'm a lawyer. I'm trained in the law, not economics. But the economists that I listen to, the experts in money and monetary policy, are saying that it's not a matter of years, it's maybe months, it could be weeks, that we're going to have this huge hyperinflation, which could create a situation overnight where, one day you can feed your children and the next day you don't have any money to feed your children.
And that would, so we've seen food riots in Northern Africa and Middle East. And that's a possibility happening over here then, with this hyperinflation. I see that we're running out of time on this program, but Our Lady of Fatima said if her requests were granted, we would have peace. She said if her requests were not granted, we would have things like famine as well as war. And it's important that we pay attention to Our Lady of Fatima. Pray your rosary every day. Our Lady will protect her dear ones in the storm that's coming, the financial storm, the monetary storm that's coming soon. But do what you can to protect yourself. And we'll talk about this more on another program, John.
Okay, thank you, Father.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.